Scene 3 of the film continues the exploration of adult lesbian relationships and the subtle emotional terrain that surrounds recognition, intimacy, and the cultivation of trust among women, centering on the interaction between Kate and Jody as they reflect on the introduction of Sinn into their shared space and the broader social and emotional implications of welcoming a new adult presence into their lives. The scene opens with Kate commenting on taking Sinn into town to collect wood, immediately foregrounding Sinn's practical competence and physical capability, which are recognized and affirmed by both women in a manner that balances admiration with respectful acknowledgement, highlighting the ways that queer women often appreciate one another's abilities and contributions as a form of relational intimacy. The dialogue emphasizes the importance of competence and reliability, showing that attraction and admiration in adult lesbian relationships are not confined to physical appearance or superficial charm, but extend to character, skill, and the capacity to engage meaningfully with the tasks and responsibilities of shared life. Kate's statement, "She's a strong girl," and the subsequent agreement with Jody, "Yep, they're hard workers," functions as a subtle form of emotional validation, recognizing Sinn not only as capable but as someone whose presence enhances the communal and relational dynamics of the space. This recognition mirrors real-world dynamics in which queer women often rely on mutual acknowledgement and affirmation to cultivate a sense of belonging, particularly in contexts where social norms may otherwise marginalize their presence or undervalue their contributions. As the conversation develops, Kate admits initial skepticism, acknowledging that she was a little suspicious at first, which provides insight into the careful negotiation of trust and the emotional labor involved in opening oneself to new relationships. This hesitation is deeply resonant for LGBTQ+ audiences, as it mirrors lived experiences of negotiating safety, respect, and ethical engagement in spaces where queer identity may complicate assumptions about motives or intentions. The dialogue further reveals the subtle interplay between initial wariness and eventual acceptance, demonstrating how queer women cultivate relational intuition, emotional literacy, and discernment in order to navigate adult connections with both openness and care. Jody's lighthearted interjection, "Aren't I always?" reinforces the rhythm of mentorship and relational guidance within the narrative, highlighting the interplay of experience, observation, and ethical awareness that informs the development of trust between women. The scene's nuanced attention to conversation also illustrates how admiration, mentorship, and subtle attraction may coexist in adult lesbian relationships, where emotional intensity is expressed through observation, dialogue, and shared experiences rather than overt or sensationalized gestures. As Kate continues, she references assumptions about the presence of pretty young girls and playfully probes Jody's intentions, revealing the ways that queer women must constantly negotiate and articulate relational boundaries, desires, and ethical comportment in order to maintain social legibility and emotional safety. This exchange, conducted with humor and restraint, exemplifies the ways in which queer women often translate admiration and emotional resonance into socially intelligible forms, allowing for the acknowledgement of desire, trust, and ethical connection without triggering cultural anxieties about propriety, power, or transgression. The dialogue around appearance, type, and preference, where Kate notes that little Lily is just your type, and Jody responds, "No baby, she's too skinny," further reinforces the film's focus on emotional intimacy, ethical reflection, and relational negotiation, demonstrating that adult lesbian desire is multifaceted and ethically aware, integrating personal preference, relational context, and attentiveness to one another's responses. Jody's insistence, "I only want you," and her invitation, "You gonna show me how much you mean that," while framed in playful, affectionate terms, underscores the centrality of relational focus, emotional specificity, and mutual recognition in sustaining adult queer intimacy, highlighting the importance of presence, acknowledgement, and relational affirmation as expressions of love and care. This emphasis on attentiveness, mutual recognition, and ethical responsiveness reflects broader themes in the film, in which queer women navigate complex social landscapes while cultivating authentic relationships that honor desire, consent, and emotional vulnerability. The scene's attention to communication, humor, and reflection models a nuanced approach to relational negotiation, emphasizing the ongoing calibration of trust, affection, and ethical engagement as core components of adult lesbian relational life. The narrative positions Kate and Jody as co-architects of a relational space in which Sinn's integration is facilitated through both practical support and emotional guidance, illustrating the ways in which adult queer women negotiate mentorship, admiration, and relational inclusion in ethically grounded ways. The dialogue demonstrates that relational trust is cultivated through observation, reflection, and reciprocal responsiveness, underscoring the emotional intelligence and attentiveness required to sustain meaningful queer connections, particularly in contexts where desire, power, and visibility intersect. The film's careful depiction of these dynamics foregrounds the emotional labor inherent in adult lesbian relationships, including the negotiation of expectations, ethical awareness, and attentiveness to the other's experience, thereby resisting cultural tendencies to oversimplify or sensationalize queer intimacy. In this context, The scene exemplifies the ways queer women often engage in subtle, ethically informed forms of relational affirmation. Recognizing one another's strengths, negotiating trust, and articulating emotional significance in ways that honor both individual agency and mutuality. The playful probing of intentions, the discussion of initial assumptions, and the acknowledgement of competencies all serve as narrative mechanisms through which the film explores the ethical, emotional, and relational dimensions of adult lesbian life, offering a reflective model of connection that prioritizes authenticity, consent, and attentiveness over superficial or sensationalized markers of desire. By focusing on dialogue, interiority, and the ongoing negotiation of relational dynamics, the scene highlights the ways queer women articulate, embody, and recognize desire and admiration within ethical frameworks that balance openness with care, curiosity with reflection, and recognition with restraint. This attention to ethical and emotional nuance resonates with LGBTQ+ audiences. By modeling the strategies through which queer women cultivate relational trust and intimacy in social and professional contexts that may otherwise marginalize or misunderstand same-gender desire. Furthermore, the narrative underscores the significance of co-constructed relational space, illustrating that adult lesbian intimacy is not solely defined by individual desire but emerges through shared experiences, mutual acknowledgement, and ethical attention to one another's boundaries, capacities, and emotional responsiveness. The interplay of humor, playfulness, and reflective dialogue in the scene reveals how queer women navigate relational risk, social visibility, and ethical engagement, showing that emotional intimacy can manifest in nuanced, non-sensationalized ways that are profoundly resonant and ethically grounded. In doing so, the film challenges prevailing cultural tendencies to erase, trivialize, or sensationalize lesbian relationships, insisting instead on the legitimacy, depth, and complexity of adult queer emotional life. The scene also foregrounds the negotiation of desire, admiration, and relational focus as integral to sustaining adult queer partnerships, highlighting the ethical and emotional work involved in translating personal feelings into socially intelligible and mutually respectful interactions. The narrative emphasizes that trust, recognition, and ethical responsiveness are cultivated through attention, observation, and reflective engagement, offering a model for adult lesbian intimacy that is attentive, emotionally literate, and socially grounded. By situating Sinn's integration into the household alongside Kate and Jody's reflections on trust, competence, and relational ethics, the film presents a nuanced depiction of queer mentorship and relational inclusion, demonstrating how admiration, affection, and desire can coexist with ethical consideration, practical engagement, and the negotiation of boundaries. This approach resonates with LGBTQ+ audiences by affirming the validity and complexity of adult lesbian desire and relational life, emphasizing that intimacy encompasses recognition, ethical awareness, mutual support, and shared relational labor. The scene further illustrates how queer women cultivate relational space that accommodates ethical engagement, emotional responsiveness, and the integration of new adult presences into existing social and emotional frameworks, reflecting the ongoing negotiation of visibility, trust, and relational authenticity that characterizes much of lesbian adult life. By highlighting the balance between personal preference, ethical engagement, and relational attentiveness, the narrative demonstrates that queer intimacy involves a constellation of emotional, practical, and ethical considerations, foregrounding the reflective, deliberate, and mutually respectful nature of adult lesbian relational practice. The dialogue's attention to humor, affirmation, and relational negotiation emphasizes the importance of emotional literacy, observation, and ethical reflection in sustaining queer intimacy, presenting a narrative in which desire, admiration, and affection are expressed through nuanced, socially intelligible, and emotionally resonant forms. Through the careful depiction of mentorship, relational inclusion, and the negotiation of boundaries, Scene 3 contributes to a larger cultural conversation about visibility, ethical care, and emotional truth in lesbian and queer women's relationships, offering a representation of intimacy that is deeply reflective, ethically aware, and socially grounded. The film foregrounds the emotional labor involved in sustaining adult queer relationships, showing how attention to competence, trustworthiness, ethical engagement, and mutual recognition forms the foundation for meaningful intimacy, while also providing space for admiration, playful exploration, and subtle expressions of desire. By situating the dialogue within a context of adult responsibility, shared tasks, and relational mentorship, the scene underscores the multidimensional nature of lesbian relational life, emphasizing that emotional connection is cultivated through ongoing negotiation, attentiveness, and reflective engagement rather than through immediacy or spectacle. This approach allows audiences, particularly women and LGBTQ+ viewers, to see their own experiences of boundary setting, mentorship, admiration, and relational trust reflected in the narrative, offering validation, recognition, and resonance for the complex ways in which adult queer women navigate intimacy and desire. The interplay between Jody and Kate's observations, reflections, and affirmations creates a layered understanding of relational dynamics that foregrounds ethical engagement, emotional intelligence, and relational presence as central components of adult lesbian intimacy, highlighting the ways queer women negotiate care, admiration, and trust within social frameworks that may not fully recognize their desires. Through its nuanced attention to dialogue, relational observation, and the integration of practical tasks with emotional engagement, the scene models the ongoing negotiation of visibility, authenticity, and ethical relational practice that defines adult queer life, emphasizing that intimacy is constituted not only by desire, but also by care, observation, and ethical responsiveness. Scene 3 thus offers a deeply reflective, ethically grounded, and emotionally nuanced exploration of adult lesbian relationships, showing how admiration, trust, relational inclusion, and mentorship operate in tandem to create meaningful, socially intelligible, and emotionally resonant connections. The narrative highlights that queer women's relational lives are constructed through attention, dialogue, and ethical engagement, and that adult intimacy requires balancing personal preference, desire, and emotional responsiveness with consideration of boundaries, trust, and mutual recognition. By prioritizing interiority, reflection, and ethical awareness, the film situates adult lesbian intimacy as both socially grounded and emotionally rich, providing a model for understanding how queer women negotiate desire, admiration, and ethical engagement in ways that are authentic, resonant, and deeply reflective of real-world relational complexity. The scene illustrates that emotional intimacy among queer women is cultivated through observation, dialogue, mentorship, and the careful calibration of attention, respect, and admiration, emphasizing that desire, care, and relational recognition are inseparable from the ethical and reflective dimensions of adult queer life. Moreover, the film challenges cultural tendencies to trivialize, erase, or sensationalize lesbian relationships, insisting instead on portraying queer intimacy as ethically grounded, emotionally resonant, and socially intelligible. Kate and Jody's dialogue, reflections, and relational negotiation provide a rich portrayal of relational labor, mentorship, and mutual recognition, highlighting the ways in which queer women navigate trust, desire, and relational inclusion within adult relational frameworks. The scene demonstrates that adult lesbian relationships are sustained through the integration of ethical awareness, reflective observation, emotional responsiveness, and relational affirmation, offering a model for audiences that values nuance, interiority, and socially grounded expression of desire and admiration. By focusing on the emotional and ethical dimensions of connection, Scene 3 foregrounds the ways in which adult lesbian relationships can provide insight, validation, and resonance for viewers seeking authentic representations of queer intimacy, highlighting the centrality of trust, mentorship, ethical engagement, and reflective emotional practice in sustaining meaningful bonds between women. The scene ultimately presents a thoughtful, nuanced, and socially grounded exploration of adult lesbian relational life, emphasizing the integration of admiration, ethical care, trust, and emotional attentiveness as essential components of queer intimacy, while resisting sensationalization or simplification, and offering a representation that is profoundly resonant, reflective, and affirming for women and LGBTQ+ audiences seeking recognition, ethical resonance, and emotional authenticity in the portrayal of queer relational life. This scene, like the previous ones, underscores the importance of careful negotiation, ethical awareness, and emotional responsiveness in adult lesbian intimacy, showing that admiration, mentorship, and relational inclusion are intertwined with desire and recognition, producing a portrayal of queer life that is ethically considered, emotionally nuanced, and socially meaningful, ultimately contributing to ongoing cultural conversations about visibility, authenticity, and the quiet resilience of women-centered relationships.